So this game is what happens when a metalhead that's a fan of both Dark Souls and Doom becomes a game developer. Yeah, the influences are pretty obvious with this one. For those that don't know, this is Elderborn, the indie hack and slash game developed by Hyperstrange that barely anybody played last year. And when I mean that barely anybody played this last year, I mean it. You know a game is low key when it doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. It's a shame though, since this game was a pleasant surprise in my game diggings last year. A nice blend of two of some of my favorite game series. You could definitely see the concept getting taken further with a higher budget, because as it is now, it's pretty fucking rough around the edges. As expected for an indie Unity engine game, but it's still fun regardless. The closest we've gotten to a good Conan game, but I digress. So what's the premise? Well, you play as some Viking motherfucker that gets called to some mysterious city called Jarnum. You fight through hordes of enemies while attaining new weapons, and that's about it. Yeah, this is one of those games where the story doesn't matter. There's only like 3 cutscenes in this game, and it's mostly the main character spouting off some self-righteous warrior stuff. Couldn't give a shit about what goes on in this game, as it's clear what makes this game awesome isn't this stuff, but this stuff. Similar to Doom, the attitude that this game embodies is, I live for anger and frustration! You're this overpowered warrior that takes on waves of demons with this loud metal music playing in the background. The obvious difference is that instead of using guns, you're armed with more primitive weapons like swords, spears, hammers, and what have you. This game is also very dungeon crawler-like, where instead of going from arena to arena, killing every enemy, you're mostly going to be going through these ruins trying to find keys to access locked doors. And yeah, I did say that this game was a Souls-like, which means that there's bonfire checkpoints all over, and if you die twice, you lose all your currency. It also means that enemies for the most part shouldn't be taken lightly, as it only takes a couple hits to turn you past tense. That's kind of it with the Doom and Souls comparisons though. If anything, the combat in this game feels like Skyrim but on steroids. You know how the melee combat in Skyrim is mostly hacking away at enemies until you run out of stamina? Well, the combat in this game is kind of like that, except you have no stamina, which means that you can really turn off your brain and be as aggressive as you want. Swing your sword like a madman, dashing as much as you want. It works for the most part. Almost all your weapons are useful to some degree, with all of them having a nice amount of weight to them. It makes decapitations and head smashes oh so satisfying. The enemies also keep you on your toes, with some hitting like fucking trucks, and later on, a lot of them requiring parrying and moving around a lot. It's challenging, but in a fair way. All this on its own makes the combat pretty cool, but there's one simple thing that really brings it all together. Yes sir, the Dark Messiah kick. You know, with that game, this one, and recently Deathloop, I'm starting to think that any game with this move automatically makes it better. There's just something about yeeting people off high spots that never gets old. It's fucking hilarious, and also your most powerful move. Unironically, it's how you dispatch most enemies in this game, since a lot of them are located near ledges. You learn real quick that this is the most efficient way to take out guys, especially later on in the city where you're constantly fighting near ledges. It's also a good shutdown move. Got some guys lunging at you in the air, kick that bitch back down. Works on most enemies and makes this game hella easy at points, but it's always satisfying nonetheless. You probably get the point by now. The combat in this game is pretty fun. Wish there was more to the leveling up system though. There's only 3 stats that you could put experience points into, and there's really no reason not to dump everything into might. Also, it doesn't help that you don't really feel all that much stronger after leveling up. Well, at least I didn't. Put most of my points into might, and the same enemies were taking the same amount of punishment. As a result, I never really gave a shit about dying and losing my essence. As far as the dungeon crawling, it's pretty straightforward stuff. The keys that you're supposed to find are usually laid out in open rooms that loop back to where you're supposed to put them in. Some of the traps can be a little cheap as they do so much damage. Often you'll die before you know what's killing you, but this is only a minor gripe in the beginning. The level design also gets a little lazy during the last third, where you're mostly climbing these towers to assassinate these priest guys. The abundance of shielded enemies during the second half also slowed the combat to a pace that I didn't really care for. Also, I get wearing your influences on your sleeve, but the blatant Ornstein and Small ripoff was a little much. I mentioned that this game was rough around the edges, and yeah, this game definitely could have used a bit more touching up. Sometimes kicking dudes off high spots doesn't work as enemies get stuck for whatever reason. The noticeable lag in many combat encounters despite the requirements to run this game not being very high. Being able to trap the first boss in an endless loop that makes him a fucking joke. I will say that this game does look good for an indie Unity game, though you can definitely tell at times that it's a 3D Unity game with how plasticky some environments look at times. The aesthetic of this whole game looks like that of a cover of a heavy metal record, which I'm sure was intentional. Not an aesthetic I typically gravitate towards, but it's definitely pulled off here. The loud ass progressive metal instrumentals that play also help. It bangs at first, especially when you first arrive in the city, but I would be lying if I said that it didn't get repetitive by the game's end. So yeah, that's Elderborn. A nice little rage fest for those that are fans of both Doom and Dark Souls. You wouldn't think that the mid-paced methodical gameplay of a Souls-like could blend with the high-octane power fantasy of a Doom game, but here we are. It's a blend that's not going to jive with everyone, but it definitely jives with me. For whatever that's worth. I would say pick this up on sale since $15 for a 3-hour game is asking a bit much. Anyway, that's all I gotta say about this. Until next time.